Well, good morning, guys. Thanks for joining me, and I've got something very interesting I want to share with you. I read a book recently on the history of Ellis Island. Now, if you don't know what Ellis Island is, it is the island. It was the pretty much the depot which immigrants from all over the world, mostly like from European sections of the world, back during the late 19th and early 20th century, were funneled into and passed through inspection stations at this island. And it's very closely attached to and geographically located to the Statue of Liberty. Now, I've never been there. I don't think it's someplace that you really want to go now. I don't know. I have to look currently if it's even someplace you can go or not. But I read the history. It's called American Passages by Vincent J. Canado. I recommend it. It's a great book. But this video is not about my recommendation for the book. What I want to share with you is the whole concept of judging others. I've got an illustration to give you from this book, and I want you to hear it because I think it's very applicable, and I think you'll want to remember it. But we often hear people say all the time that you shouldn't judge others. Don't judge me. Don't judge them. I don't like people judging me. And people generally only say this when they feel like they're being judged, or when they hear something they just simply don't like. And it seems very unreasonable to make a blanket statement as you shouldn't ever judge anybody, because that's not very accurate. You have to make judgment calls about other people and about other things. And you have to make decisions. And in order to make wise decisions, you have to make judgment calls. And that is judging. Now, believe it or not, the most quoted verse in the Bible is not John 3:16. A lot of people know it. They've heard it at least. You know, for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believes in him should not perish but have everlasting life. It's very commonly, Philippians 4:13, I can do all things through Christ who strengtheneth me. John Jones has that tattooed on his chest. So, but believe it or not, as widely quoted as those verses are, the most quoted verse in the Bible is Matthew chapter 7, verse 1, judge not that ye be not judged. And you know who's quoting it the most? It's not Christians. It's the world, the rest of the world, the secular dimension. That's who's quoting it, and they don't even really know what's behind it. And the truth is, we do have to judge other people. But here's where I want to take this. Here's where I want to go with this, and I want you to listen up carefully, because it's very important. And I say it's very important because I know eventually that my kids will listen to this, and I really want them to learn this for themselves, because this is something they're going to run up against. What does it mean to judge others wrongly? Let's get that cleared up. To judge others wrongly is to look at another person or talk to another person and say or think to yourself, or perhaps to them, but at least it's going on in your mind, that I have got them figured out, without really knowing the facts. You have in your mind had a litmus test that each person that you encounter should pass. And we all do that. Every single person does that. Don't think that for a second this doesn't apply to you, because it does. We all have tests in our mind as to the quality of a person that we're engaged with in a conversation or in close proximity to. We all have this litmus test that we judge others by. And if they live up to it, if they pass it, we think, great, they're a good person. I can talk to them, I can trust them, I can rub elbows with them, I can be friends with them, or at least have some kind of working relationship with them. If they don't pass the test, they are considered undesirable. Undesirable. The problem with our test is that our tests may have no root in reality and have no relevance to the person that we're talking to. Relevance is everything. If your test doesn't really apply, if your test doesn't really fit the person you're talking to, You have no way of knowing if you're even right about them or not. You know, we oftentimes will think to ourselves, well, if they like the same things I like, we have something in common. Or if they use a lot of the same speech that I use. For instance, I grew up north. It wasn't common to say sir and ma'am after a yes or a no. And it wasn't considered disrespectful. We moved down south, and in the south, you are considered disrespectful if you do not use sir and ma'am after yes and no. Okay? It's not, as far as a northerner is concerned, has nothing to do with respect, because you can be disrespectful while saying sir or ma'am. Now, but that's where I'm coming from. Okay? That's the kind of thing I'm talking about. Or if I mean, there are all sorts of mannerisms, all sorts of manners in which one person may apply to themselves, another person may not. And we go, well, that's a horrible person because they don't do things like I do, or they're not doing what I would or wouldn't do. You know what I'm talking about. And we automatically assign desirability or undesirability to that person. Now, like I said, we all do this. And so where I want to go with this is that that's the wrong way to judge a person. There's much different ways of judging a person, and it has to come down to matters of character, and they can't be based on something so shallow and something so much on the surface. But you have to have some kind of starting point. Now, here's where I'm going with Ellis Island. Ellis Island, I believe, and I could have my dates wrong, I believe Ellis Island opened up in around 1890. Somewhere around that time. Because I know the 100-year mark of trying to restore Ellis Island took place at about around 1990. And the Statue of Liberty was, they restored it around 1986. Here's what I'm trying to say. Ellis Island represents many different things to many different people for many different reasons. Now, there's a lot of resentment, and there's a lot of idolization, on two opposite ends of the spectrum regarding Ellis Island. There's a lot of romantic ideas about what took place there, and there's a lot of misplaced anger, resentment, and misunderstandings about Ellis Island. Ellis Island was not so much a gateway for immigrants to come to America as it was a place where immigrants came to be put through the sieve or through the cauldron to find out who was desirable and undesirable to let into the country to help grow our country. Now, as bad as that may sound to you upon hearing that, there's a lot of things you must understand that about that time in history. There's a lot of things they didn't have then that we have now. And that doesn't just justify a lot of what went on, but it was a different time and a different place. I don't want to get into all of that. Here's what I want to say about that, though. A lot of people would pass through Ellis Island from different countries, and they would be, as they would walk by the inspectors, and all this happened very quickly because there were literally tens of thousands of people in a week that would pass through. So judgment calls were made very fast. People would they would line up, and they would walk through the stairs and walk through the inspection stations, and just by sight alone, within a matter of mere seconds, an inspector would make a judgment call, a very cursory judgment call, before they made further inspections about whether someone needed to be investigated more or not. If someone looked like they might have had an eye problem, or a curvature of the back, or a limp, or maybe a vacant look in their eyes, which could have come from just being so tired from being on a ship. They had a vacant look in their eyes, and they looked dumb, or they looked too shy. There was this criteria of people they wanted to enter the country to cultivate really great stock. Okay, and this is not. I mean, there's some leeway. You've got to have some understanding. You can't let everybody into the country. They didn't want criminals. They didn't want people who would become public charge. They didn't want people, when I say public charge, what I mean is people who would, in a sense, live off the generosity and beneficence of others when they didn't necessarily have that back then. They didn't have welfare and social government handouts like they do now, not in the way that we know them now. And as our country could not afford to do that. So you cannot let everybody into the country. You have to understand that. But the litmus test was sometimes ridiculous. I'm going to tell you about a litmus test here that they had that's very misplaced. One of the many things they would do. I mean, one of the many things they would do is they would hold up a picture, and I tried to download this picture myself to show you on here, but the picture came out too dark, and I wasn't sure it would come across the screen as well. But one of the things they would do is they would hold this picture called "Last Honors for Bunny." Now, in this picture, it's a turn-of-the-century painting, and in the picture you have two girls and a boy standing over a dead white bunny. And the boy has a shovel, and he's digging a hole for the bunny to be buried in, and the two girls are just watching. It's a very interesting picture. And they would hold this picture up to an immigrant and ask them how they thought about this picture, what they saw, what was going on, what were they doing, why were they burying this bunny, what's the significance of this picture. I'm not kidding you. That's really a test that they had. And if the immigrant did not answer according to the standard that the inspectors had already prearranged, they might be considered undesirable. Here's the problem. A lot of immigrants came from such poor areas and worked such they had such hard, arduous lives. They lived in ways that you and I could not imagine now. We live very easy compared to very comfortably compared to what some of these people did. And so you have to understand they weren't like us. They weren't like us because they didn't get a lot of the easy breaks that you and I had. They lived completely differently. Now, here's how they saw this picture. They didn't know how to answer these questions. And for reasons like they couldn't understand why the boys and girls were dressed the way they were. They couldn't understand why the bunny was dead. They couldn't understand why the bunny was a pet. They couldn't understand why anybody would have a pet bunny. They didn't understand the whole ceremony that was going on between the two little girls and the boy. They couldn't understand that. They couldn't, because they don't do that in their country. There's just something that's not akin to anything that in any way they live. Forgive me, my mouth is getting dry, which means I'm talking too long. But that's what I'm talking about. And they would judge these people based on tests like this. And there was many more like that. One of my father's favorite verses in the Bible is Jude 22. And it says, "Of some have compassion, making a difference." And sometimes the compassionate element was left out. Not always. A lot of the Ellis Island inspectors did have compassion, but some of it was misplaced, and some of the tests they put on others to decide whether someone was desirable or undesirable was wrong, because it had no relevance whatsoever to the person they were talking to. What I want to convey to you today is I want you to assess for yourself. Look at the way that you think. Look at the way that you communicate with others and the way that you think about other people. And ask yourself if you've already got tests in your mind for other people that may not have absolutely no application whatsoever and no relevance in their lives. In other words, some people just can't win. Some people might never be able to win with you, and they're perfectly good people. I have to do this. I have to check myself all the time, because we have our own ideas. And your idea might be wrong. Your idea might be right. A wise thing to do would be write down on a piece of paper at the end of a day and ask yourself where you went wrong in your relationship with somebody else. I mean, I'm talking about a very scant relationship. You ran into somebody. It might have been the person who it might have been the cashier at your grocery store. It might have been the person who you the person who you ordered your food from when you went to a restaurant, or a customer out in the field. But you might have it wrong. You might have made a judgment call on somebody that wasn't compassionate because it did not take into account their background. You don't have to understand where someone comes from. You don't have to understand everything about them. Just understand that you might be wrong and that there might be more things that you need to know. And use compassion and just give people more of a chance. And, when it came right down to it at Ellis Island, the right thing to do was not to judge people based on whether they had a limp, a cloudy eye, a hump on their back, or maybe they just didn't look a certain way and they got a chalk mark on the back. And that's what they would do. They would mark a chalk, take a piece of chalk, make a stripe on their back, and they would be sent for further inspection. And those would be just as ridiculous. They didn't make Ellis Island all bad. And your judgment calls, even if they might be wrong sometimes, they don't make you all bad. But just consider, take it into consideration that maybe you might have things wrong. Maybe the test that you have in your mind for other people to determine whether they're desirable or undesirable to you could use some tweaking. All right, look, I probably talked too long. I thank you for your time. If you've liked this video, hit the thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed, I'd appreciate it if you would do it and check out some of my other videos. I hope you guys have a great day. I've got to get to work, and I'm glad to be back. I'll catch you guys later. Bye-bye.